Oh, just like ask questions. I want this to be like recitation shaped. So like ideally, like mostly it's driven by you asking me questions about what we're doing or like something that's on your mind, and we can try to figure out how to get there in code, like in the context of this particular challenge. I'm up here because I want to have like some kind of way to draw a domain model out. So like, yeah, I can draw lines here like this. It's not like the coolest. I don't know if I want, yeah, this is what I want. It's like just I want a crayon. Yeah, that's good. Crayon's great. Yeah, this is gonna work just fine, y'all. I'm excited about this. Where's my dang eraser? Oh, there it is. So simple. Did I just erase transparency onto the whiteboard?
You did.
I don't like that.
It's weird that they would have that.
That's kind of weird that I would be able to, yeah, that's right. Yeah, paint into layer. Yeah, let me paint into the, nope. Well, this is becoming, set what? Nope. So now I feel like I'm, wait, what is happening?
It's replace.
Wow. I'm very confused. Well, here's what I can do, is I can erase all this, and then I can paint dropper, and I can do a vector fill of white into the transparency. But no, I can't. Okay, well, that's too much. Thanks, Sketch.io, but no thanks. What about this? I've always had success with this one. Wireframe.cc is easy because I can just like highlight stuff that you want, and then you can decide to like make a shape or whatever. So I wanted something like this because I could like easily make text. I could say something like car if I needed to, right? And then I could like list out stuff that's supposed to be connected. Anyways, I wanted to have something like this up because I want to get into this auto shop just to review some OO stuff. And looking at this README, this can be kind of scary. We have deliverables. I think of this as like a client has given us some things that they want from us, and I need to be able to look at what the client has told us, and based on that, like figure out what it is we're supposed to build. So they say here, word just coming down from the higher ups, and you're in charge of building out a domain that keeps track of cars, owners, and mechanics that service them. Each car has its own classification, like antique, exotic, or clunker, and each mechanic has a specialization. They're the same as car classifications. So, and mechanic sounds like will also be specialized for antique, exotic, or clunker work. Because yeah, you don't want like the beamer jerk to touch your Camaro. I guess that's a thing if you're a car person, sure. Each car owner may have a ton of cars, but these folks are fanatical about their maintenance and they only see one mechanic like per car. The basics have been built out for you, but you'll need to figure out the relationships and create most of the methods. Hook it up. Here's what we need to do. A car owner, get a list of all owners, get a list of all the cars that a specific owner has, get a list of all the mechanics that a specific owner goes to, get the average amount of cars owned for all owners. Okay, a car needs to have a list of all the cars, and a list of all the car classifications, and a list of mechanics that have an expertise that matches the car classification. Okay. We need to have a list of all mechanics, a list of all cars that a mechanic services, and a list of all the car owners that go to a specific mechanic, and a list of the names of all car owners who go to a specific mechanic. Now, like, where do we start with something like this? Like, we have this, these are things, right? These are all things we should be able to do in theory, but I feel like we're missing some stuff, right? I have these kind of general steps that are given. I know that we have a model domain that's going to have 3 different models in it of car owner, car, and mechanic. I'm kind of confused as to how we would relate these pieces together. Luckily, we do have in our tools folder here, we have a console RB file. This is going to require this config environment file. And what this file does is like require everything. So like because of config environment, we know where everything in the app is and how to use it. So all we really need to do is open up this console.rb file, which gets into a pry session. We can put lines of code like above binding.pry if we wanted to. Like if we know that we need to create a car, we might call like car.new, right? Car.new. And then we could go into binding.pry with console and figure it out. So like as we work, I want to be periodically using console to see if we're on the right track, but I still feel like console might be a little premature. Let me just make sure we're spun up here. Ruby, tools, console. Couldn't find pry in any of the sources, run bundle install to install missing gems. That's because some of this config environment stuff requires a gem called require all. Our pry call requires the gem pry. So they've put that stuff and also our spec inside of this gem file. We can use bundle install, which uses a gem called bundler. If you don't have that, you could write gem install bundler first. But I think that we've all, by doing these labs, had the point of having bundler. So I just say bundle install. This goes to the location set in the gem file. Usually it's rubygems.org. It goes and finds like the relevant copy of those gems based on the version of Ruby that it detects on my system, and some other stuff like defaults that are set up there on the web. And then that bundles our gems. So now let's try this console.rb. Oh no, initialize. Wrong number of arguments, given 0, expected 3. So there's already some code here under car.rb that we need to consider. And check it out. It wants to know about make, model, and classification, like right off the bat. So we could use this, right? I probably wouldn't want to overwrite this in an actual like code challenge situation. If somebody's put code in front of me, I might want to make small tweaks to it and refactors if I have time, but I don't want to just like throw babies out with bathwater, so to speak. So let me go back and think about this car class as like an inroad into building the app. Let's look more at these deliverables of a car. Get a list of cars, get a list of classifications, get a list of mechanics that have an expertise that matches the car classification. So list of all cars, as I'm thinking about these, is this gonna be more like class method or instance method shaped? Would I ask one car or the overall car class to list all the cars? I'd ask the class for this. What about a list of all the car classifications that there are? I think that's a class method too, right? I'd feel comfortable asking one car about its classification, but I wouldn't feel comfortable asking one car about all the car classifications. What about this last one? Get a list of mechanics that have an expertise that matches the car classification. That feels like instance. What word in the sentence indicates instance? The, right? The car classification. The client, they might send you an email that has a word sentence like this, right? And then sometimes you're working and you're honestly going like, how did this person be in a position where they can like fund an entire app if they can't even like write a really precise sentence in an email and like explain what they want? But part of our job is to understand that like clients don't really know how to ask for what they want in technical terms, and that's not a problem. They're trying to run other parts of their business. We're trying to help them with the code part. So we have to be code whisperers and know how to translate to Ruby, and we have to know how to translate to just layperson human, right? So layperson human says, matches the car's classification, and in my brain I'm thinking instance, because that's one classification that we're focused on from the perspective of car. That feels like an instance scope, something that would know about its own classification and then go looking for mechanics that can help me out, right? So this doesn't still tell me too much about like how a car relates to other stuff, but I do feel pretty confident that we might be able to start at car because of the things that car is looking at. It wants make, model, and classification, right? Nowhere in here does it talk about an owner or does it talk about a mechanic, right? So we don't have to really figure out how to be an owner object or how to be a mechanic object to like live on this car, at least not just yet. If we go back to the README, let's think about these relationships more. Each car owner may have a ton of cars. Well, that does feel like there's gonna be a relationship, doesn't it? Let's look at car owner. Let's see what the code we have in front of us. Car owner has a name, mechanic has a name and a specialty. Car has make, model, and classification. One thing I notice here, none of these models are talking about any other models right now. So now I'm kind of thinking about this logically, like maybe because this is in the section of labs called OO relationships, maybe they've given us a lot of boilerplate to set up the classes, and they're really focused on us spending time in the relationships. So I think that the reason that we don't see other objects referenced is because it's on us to figure out how to reference those other objects. So that's in the back of my head. All of this is like I read through the README, and I still consider this like the putting on my boots section of doing coding, where I'm like in the README, I'm popping between the README and other code, I'm making sure that I can try to get into some kind of a pry session. Maybe I go back there knowing what I know about car now, that like we can make a car with these 3 arguments. It might not be enough. Later on, a car might need an owner, right? It could be that there is a one-to-many relationship between an owner and their cars. It could also be that there's a many-to-many relationship between an owner and their cars. We'll get into that in a second, but first, let's go back to this console and try to fix our car.new, because the error that we had was wrong number of arguments, given 0, expected 3. Why did we get that error? We didn't pass any arguments, right? Car.new is being passed all by itself, but every time car initialize runs, it wants to have a make, a model, and a classification. So what are the classifications we can choose from? Antique, exotic, or clunker. Okay, so we'll say that it is a Merkur Scorpio, and it's a clunker. Only after I drove it into the fire hydrant, and it was an accident. All right, so now we're in binding.pry. Can I see like this car.new somehow? I guess, well, what could I do? Why am I here? Can I call this here? Can I say car.new? Car.new. Merkur. This feels kind of pointless to me. Like, why am I writing this a second time? Is there a way I could avoid having to write this a second time in the console? Variable, sure, I like that idea. Let's do that instead. Because I think the whole reason I ran this was that I wanted to see how this car would behave. So let's just say Scorpio equals this, and then we'll run this back. So we're in here, we say Scorpio. We can see our car. It's got a classification, it's got a make, and it's got a model. Let's call Scorpio.make. Let's call Scorpio.model. And let's call Scorpio.classification. Why is that an error? Undefined method? Let's go check. There's no reader method for classification. We wrote readers. We wrote adder reader, make, and model. Here's a review question. What does the adder reader for model look like if I had to type it out? What's the name of the method?
Model equals.
No, that's the writer.
That's the writer, very good. So the reader doesn't require an argument because we're just trying to get the value, not set it with something new. So I think the def model would be the name. What's this method need to do? Yeah, we're just going to return an instance variable that matches the name of the method. And the method is going to get written matching the name of the symbol that we pass into adder reader. So that's how the macro works, right? It reads the symbol and goes, oh, let me name that method. Let me call on the same name instance variable inside the method, and I'll just add that method definition to the ones that we have. So that's what's happening under the hood for our adder reader for model. Oh, sure. That's a data type in Ruby. It's called symbol. So it's like, it kind of, you can read it like a string, but a symbol is also always designed to be immutable. Like once you declare a symbol, that symbol can't be like reset to a different set of characters. So it's beneficial because it gives you like a human readable value that it's hard to accidentally change and get pointed in the wrong direction. That's basically. Yeah, that's it. The symbol represents the name of the method that's going to be created by the adder reader macro. Yeah. So we have those readers. Let's add a reader for classification just to make a car responsive that way. Should be a symbol. And now I want to come back and really think about how this car, like I feel like we're warmed up now. Because what have we done? We've initialized one object. We've initialized an object inside of tools console.rb. We've had to do our bundle install to like make sure that console works for us. We had to go over here and like actually when we ran stuff, we had to deal with some errors and stuff around object initialization that made us really have to kind of dig in and understand how the car class is connected to the rest of the application. Once we got that hooked up, now I feel like we're ready to really dive in and start delivering on stuff. But I would recommend taking 5 or 10 minutes at the start of any sort of timed challenge to read through the README and get something working in a console before you get your head down in code too much, because otherwise you might fall into a trap of, I haven't been in the console, I'm having issues getting into the console, but it's already been 25 minutes, I feel like the console is too new to me, I'm just not going to use the console. Then you're coding without feedback, right? Which is kind of like trying to like sing a concert with your ears plugged. Like you might be doing a great job, but you can't really tell while you're doing it, which is going to induce a lot of anxiety and probably mess with your performance at the same time. So in any case, let's talk about this README again. Let's look at how a car relates to an owner. So each car owner may have a ton of cars, but these folks are fanatical about their maintenance. They only see one mechanic per car. So a car owner wants to get a list of all the cars that a specific owner has and wants to get a list of all the mechanics that a specific owner goes to. This car needs to get a list of mechanics that have expertise that matches car classification. I'm not seeing anything that connects a car to a certain number of owners here, right? What I'm kind of looking for is like, I see that an owner seems to have many cars, right? I don't know if that's a one-to-many or a many-to-many though. Like it could be that an owner has many cars and that a car is also owned by many owners, right? It could be that an owner has many cars and each car belongs to one owner, right? So given that this is kind of unclear to me, right? I see that, yeah, one owner to many cars, but one car to one owner, I don't know, one car to many owners, it's not clear based on this, right? Up here in the README, as we go and check once again, does a car, it says here, keeps track of cars, their owners, still unclear, right? Plural cars, plural owners, it could be one owner per car, the way that that's written. So if this is like an email from a client, right, before I make any sort of reply, like asking for clarification on stuff, in this context, it would be like asking an instructor, right? Like, what do you think about this schema? I know it can go two ways. I'm looking around through all of that stuff. I'm trying to figure out both sides of the one-to-many versus many-to-many. And then given that I don't have a lot more information here, I'm gonna assume that it's a one-to-many because like I don't have enough information that says that it would be a many-to-many. In my experience, I don't really think of like cars as being multiply owned unless you have like an app subscription or something like that. It feels like car ownership is more of a one-to-many thing in real life. And then when I look at these notes, I don't see clear contravening evidence to point me in the other direction. So I'm gonna say that like one owner has many cars. And I'm gonna hold that with like maybe 80% certainty in my head. I know that I might need to like shift on that if I detect a sentence that I missed. But does everybody kind of follow that logic that I go through of like, I'm looking around, I'm trying to see where like a car could have many owners. I don't see that. In my own head, it feels like a car should have one owner. And it feels like they'd be more clear pointing the other direction if that wasn't the case. So I'm gonna say that it's gonna be a one-to-many between a car and an owner. So if it's a one-to-many between a car and an owner, the many needs to belong to the one. Right? That means to me that one object should be holding another object. Should it be a car owner holding a single car or a car holding a single car owner? I like that idea. Here's why. Because if we know that a car belongs to one car owner, right? We're not going to put like an array of owners on the car. We just have one, right? But I could think of putting like an array of cars that's associated with an owner. So that doesn't feel like, and that doesn't feel the same, right? Because we've started looking into arrays on other objects now, like calling object.all. So yeah, in general, the thing that is the many belongs to the thing that is the one, right? And that means that the thing that is the many depends on the thing that is the one, which also could mean that the thing that is the many carries the thing that is the one in order for it to work. Like I think Owen and I were just looking at an example where like song and artist, and if you had a song that didn't have an artist object on it, then you couldn't call like song.artist.name the same way that you could do it with other songs. So like for a song to be able to return an artist name, it depends on an artist being there. For a car to be able to say who its owner's name is, right, needs to open the glove compartment, needs to find a registration in there. So we'll put an owner on the car. And I think that we could do it like this. Make model classification owner. Like just take it in as another argument, perhaps. We could have an adder reader for the owner as well. We could set an instance variable so that the reader has something to grab. And if a car is going to belong directly to one owner, right? And then if I look further in the README and I see that the owner is going to need to have a list of all of the cars that that specific owner has, then I think this is a really excellent place for us to review a one-to-many relationship and how we could build that. If I was going to draw out a schema right now so far, I might say that I have car here, and that, so we draw a little text thing here that says owner. And under this, oh yeah, each of these is like a multi-line thing. So I can like bold this. Ooh, I'm feeling so fancy. A car has a make, and a classification, and an owner. This is how I'm going to draw my chicken foot line because I'm super advanced. I'm basically a Photoshop wizard in real life, so I'm just known for it. It's not a big deal. You don't have to feel intimidated. All right, Cool. So an owner has a name, right? And the owner has many cars, and each of the cars has one owner. And so like the many here, the like open part of the caret points back to the one. That's kind of how I'm trying to visualize it just on a screen here so that it holds up for the video recording, right? So I don't just have a whiteboard that we point to later. Cool. So this is kind of what I'm thinking about. And if we're going to do this, then car owner getting a list of all owners, I'm not sure if that's an important step for me right now. But we can warm up with it, right? Getting a list of all owners seems like the same thing on car. I'm thinking of this as like a class method. And if you don't have a clear definition, like on a challenge kind of situation of whether something should be a class or an instance method, definitely take the time to plan that out. Like scope out your work, literally, right? Is it class scope or is it instance scope? Do I need to put self dot before the method definition or do I not? How do I plan on actually calling that in driver code? So we practiced calling some instance methods, right? Using our console. Maybe what we could do now is after calling car.new, we could do like a p car.all. Right? So let's get into car and do a car.all, like to get into this class method kind of deal. Oh, I am. Thank you. Sick. So, oh, thank you. Yep, I missed a couple things. So yeah, car.all. How do I make a car.all? That's a class method, right? So how does the method define? Self.car? Self.all, right? Yeah, self would be the car part, right? And then .all is going to be the actual method that I call, for sure. So self.all, and then I need to actually define it. What needs to happen? Ooh, vself. That's like a holiday-themed VS Code. It watches you while you code. So double at all. What does double at mean? Sure, it's a class scoped variable. So if we're going to use a class scoped method, it's good that we have a variable to match. What should the initial value of at all be, or at all be? An empty array? I agree. What are we going to do with that empty array, and when? Fill it on initialization. Cool. So what does that look like here in the initialize method?
Add all shovel.
Cool. It doesn't matter in current versions of Ruby where you do the shoveling of self, because self is still being tracked through initialize, and so it can still pick up instance variables after it's been shoveled, right? But like in my own brain, I really like to think of it in this order. I like to think of like as a factory, right? Of like, I'm putting the parts together, I'm sanding, painting, and then it's like, gets put in the box alongside the others, right? That just got made. So like in my mental model, I would never like put the thing in the box and then like reach into the little like carton and try to paint the figurine or whatever. So yeah, this I think could work, right? And we can test it because we have a nice hookup with our console, so we can like do an up enter shaped feedback loop. Oh no, wrong number of arguments, given 3, expected 4. Well, that kind of makes sense, right? Because we did say that the car should have an owner, right? And so what do I do with that 4th argument right now? What about this? Because I don't really care about a car owner right now. I just want to get in and see if car.all works. Here's a thought, just for now. Because I'm not going to deal with the owner in any of the code that I've written on car. It's not on the step that I'm on. I can change nil out for like a given owner variable when I get to that point, but for now it's just asking for an explicitly passed 4th argument. I think this could work. Just kind of shamelessly barging ahead, like I know what I'm going after. I don't want to get too distracted. I'm here to make sure that car.all works. Did car.all work? Oh wait, look what happened up here. There's an array. Sometimes, you know, with pry and stuff, the way that it prints out, you have to like look above. But I could call it from within pry too if I wasn't sure. Car.all. We have this array. That is exactly the car that we just created, right? With a car.new. We could make another one. Car.new. I don't know. Mercedes. Benz. It's the Benz 3. I don't know what that is. It's the 3rd one they ever made, so it's old. And then no one owns it because Martin Shkreli tried to buy it, but then the Wu-Tang got involved. Car.all. There we go. There's 2 cars that we made, right? And so you see this kind of feedback loop at this point. Feel how comfortable this feels, right? That like we've actually kind of killed one of the things on the README just now, that we could go back here and take a look, and car, get a list of all cars class, right? That's done. We're gonna emoji that. All set. So we've got a list of all the cars. What if we wanted to get a list of all the car classifications, right? We could run that and try that out. Let's come back to this one-to-many though, right? Between a car and owner. So get a list of all the cars that a specific owner has. Get a list of all the owners. How about we start by like working on how an owner initializes, and then like just repeat the work we did with car.all to handle owner.all while that's still kind of fresh, right? That can be a good strategy when we work. We find a pattern and we like apply it while it's still fresh in our head. So a list of all the owners. What does it mean to be a car owner? It needs to initialize with a name. That seems pretty straightforward. So the first thing I'm going to do now is come over to the console, knowing that this code works, is I'll say like, I don't know, Odin the owner, car owner dot new. It's Odin Odinson. Sweet. And then we'll do like a car owner dot all. Maybe what I'll do here is get into I'll do a p Odin. I'm expecting car owner.all to break right now because we haven't actually written that method. But in the process of this, I want to make sure that I understand how car owner initialize works, like as we prepare for that next step. So let's try that out. Let's exit, run that back. There we go. There's a car owner, name Odin Odinson, undefined method all for car owner class. So cool. Let's go into the car owner class and provide that method. So what were the ingredients? Somebody shout out one of them for a car owner.all method.
Double add all equals blank.
Sure, we need double add all equals a blank array. Okay, and then somebody else, what's another ingredient that we need?
Initialize shovels the instance into it.
Okay, and somebody else, what's another ingredient? And what's the method going to be called? Very good. And what's the method going to return somebody else? Very good. Teamwork. Boom, there it is. Okay, we called it, right? It didn't fail. We didn't print anything, so we have to call it again. That's fine. It's one of those things where like the reward I give myself for making sure I've done the step right is I get into pry. Like being able to get into pry becomes the reward. That's how I know I've written some like strong driver code, because the code doesn't run unless the driver code runs. Another way to test, kind of picking up what we talked about yesterday. And you'll see this a lot too in Mod 2 when we talk about like seeding data into databases. A lot of times people will write their seed file in a way that it can't run until the code is ready to come together. But yeah, we're in here, we've got car owner.all, that's working okay. So now we can go back to the README. Let's knock that one out super quick. Boom. Okay, all the cars that a specific owner has. So to get a list of all the cars that a specific owner has, we've already taken care of one piece of this. We've thought about the car owner, right? Because we've thought about both sides of the relationship. And since a car belongs to an owner, that's how an owner is going to find itself, right? That's how a car owner will be able to locate, oh, there I am on that instance of car. So I think what we need to do here is amend our console and remember that like maybe Odin has been created, so maybe now we can pass Odin in as our owner. That'll handle like associating this car that we had with the car owner now that we've figured that piece out. So then we need to have like a car owner.cars method. Def cars. How is a car owner going to get an array of car objects that are associated with their ownership? Yeah.
You sift through the cars all,
Okay.
like a find all.
So we
And
can
check
sift
whether or
through.
not whether the owner of the car is equal to itself.
I like that. Sift through all the cars, matching whether the owner of the car is me. So first of all the cars we need to sift through. What's the syntax to access all the cars? Yeah, car.all. This is probably the biggest leap in a one-to-many, right? Because at this point, if I'm thinking too pattern-wise, I can think that the job of a car owner, if somebody says, I need to have a method cars that returns a whole array of cars, I might start thinking, oh, does car owner need to have a new instance variable, right? And I think the reason that this one does not and the reason that car did, right, is because of the nature of the relationship. Since the car belongs to one owner, we can put that one owner directly on the car, because each car could potentially have a different owner. That could be a different value on each car, right? But we already have a place where an array of cars lives. So if we thought about a car owner having its own array called cars, like in here, this would be a misstep to me, potentially, because now I'd have a duplicate array of cars. I've already got car.all, which tells me where all those cars are. I think that this approach is much stronger because we only have to manage the reality of the cars that are in that single array, right? Is there still ways that you could make an owner link up with a car? Like, absolutely. You could totally have an owner have an array of cars. You could manually put a car into that array. You'd be responsible for managing both of those arrays at that point. But if you arrived at that, that would be okay. I just think it's much better to have a single source of truth, and it also prepares us for some stuff that's coming up next. So yeah, we have car.all. We need to sift through this. Jack had briefly mentioned one alias of a method we could use to sift through. Does anybody else remember another alias for that method? Select, very good. Find all and select are going to be synonymous. So we have car.all, and to sift we use select. And if I need a refresher on select, I can always find it in my trusty dusty Ruby docs. Less dusty with every new iteration. We go to select, we go to enumerable, select. Okay, returns an array based on whether the given block returns true for a given element, right? Every element that the block returns true for ends up in our output. So select is the one that needs to have something like that returns true or false. So like they have double equal Boolean stuff. They have even with a question mark. Question mark methods return true or false as well. They're trying to show us that like this is kind of a Boolean shaped tool to do our work. So we need to think of our Boolean. First, let's build the rest of our loop. We'll say do. What's a good thing to put in the pipe here if we're iterating over car.all?
Useful name of the stuff that's in the listed.
Yeah, so how would you describe each member of the array car.all? Car. I think that's a good word, right? Each one is an instance of car. So we'll go with car. And then we need to have some sort of Boolean in here. And it's whether, right? So whether owner of car is me. So is feels like a double equals. Where's me? Oh, yeah. How do I refer to me from within here? Self, right? And who's the owner on the car? How do I get to that? Car.owner. Yeah, that makes sense to me, right? This seems like it's going to work. Out of all the cars there are, as we go through each car, if that car's owner is the same as me, then I want select to build that instance of car into this output array that select is working on. So let's do this. If we've built this method, we can go to our console. We have Odin. We built a car and made it belong to Odin. Now we could try like a p odin.cars. Pardon?
Oh, I'm sorry. I see what's happening.
Yeah, I'm bringing it off of line 8 because this time when I made a car owner, I remembered to name it right off the bat according to the name because I thought that in a later step I might need to call on it. In general, like people tend to put variable names on this stuff because when they get into the pry session, they want to check on the value of that variable to see what's going on. So what I could even do here is I could say like cars equals odin.cars, right? Then we could wait until we get into pry to take a look, which is more suspenseful and arguably a little more fun. Let's try, I'm wondering if this command works. Like if I say reload, is it gonna reload a copy of like all of these files for me? Is it gonna also give me access to odin.cars? I don't know, let's try. It says true. What if I say cars? Now this says undefined local variable or method cars, and I think the reason might be that within this file, I don't think we are in config-environment.rb, right? I think config-environment.rb is including like all of our model folders though. So I think that we will still have access to Odin, and I think that we have the method access for cars. Nope, still doesn't like it. Oh well. If reload doesn't work for you, just hop out and hop back in. Don't bicker too much over the, because like how much time do we actually save? Maybe 2 seconds versus going out and coming back in. Cool, so I'll just say cars. And that does work. Look at that, we've got one car. Let's make another car that doesn't actually belong to an owner and kind of use that as a control. because I think that we want to make sure that we're not just like getting all the cars that exist on accident. So I'm going to do here. This is a Bizorpio. It's the opposite. Run it back, check out what cars is, and it's great. It's still just the car that belongs to Odin. So we've managed to go over the divide from the perspective of a car owner. We had first set up the car.all method, which was that class method calling on the class variable that we were shoveling self into every time a car initialized. The owner came over and said, hey, you built that all method, that's great. Can I have all those cars, please? I need to look through them. The method returned all those cars to the owner, and the owner was able to use select to filter through for just the ones that belong to them. So that takes care of an owner being able to list the cars that they have access to.
Can you go back to the variable for cars that we just did, like where you wrote it out?
Oh, pardon? Yeah? This-
Not there, like where we was.
Oh, yeah, and in the console here?
Yeah. Where we cars equals.
Yeah, cars equals Odin.cars right there at the
Dot
bottom.
cars is pulling the station.
Yeah, dot cars is an instance method that we have on car owner. And actually, we didn't decide that this is an instance method, but I think the word a specific owner was what made me think, as I read that it should be an instance method. List of all the mechanics that a specific owner goes to. So this is a curious one to me. We have here each car has its own classification, and each mechanic has a specialization. There's only one mechanic per car. These folks are fanatical about their maintenance. They only see one mechanic per car. So what's the relationship there? A mechanic seems like it could work on many cars, like it has a specialization. It has to be a mechanic that matches for a given car. How does this work? A list of all the mechanics that a specific owner goes to. Well, here's one. Get a list of mechanics that have an expertise that matches a car classification, right?
Should I have not initialized it?
Yeah, so does a car need to initialize with a given mechanic that it belongs to? Is this more of an example of there should just be one mechanic per specialization? And then like we create three mechanics, like one that's an antique specialist and one that's an exotic and one that's a clunker? That could potentially work. What do we think about this? This is a more, I think, vaguely defined domain, and there's a little bit of wiggle room for us to interpret how a mechanic should be associated with this.
It sounds to me like it's saying a mechanic specializes to only work on one car class.
Yeah, they each work on one kind of classification. So, but I think that still means a mechanic could potentially work on more than one car. Like there could be three different clunkers. I just can't work on any exotics.
Maybe you have because each owner only has one.
Going back to our graph
I
here.
guess an owner could have multiple mechanics if they have multiple cars.
Yeah, if a given car will have one owner, an owner will have multiple cars. If a given car has one mechanic, then through the car, an owner could have multiple mechanics, right? I have many cars. Each of those cars like belongs to one mechanic. This is kind of interesting. It's almost feeling like there's a many-to-many relationship. Like a mechanic can get money from many car owners, an owner can pay many car mechanics, but it depends on the car that like gets visited by that one particular mechanic.
Is each car only one mechanic?
I think so, because there's this line in the README here. Yeah, only see one mechanic per car.
And you could have like a mechanic variable.
Yeah, I think just like we added an owner on car, we might be able to add a mechanic on. What do you think,
Well,
Ryan?
I don't think we would want to initialize with mechanic, right? Because you have like instance variable with find
Yes.
fit this classification.
Yes.
So we would want to give it the ability to have a mechanic, but not when you first create it.
I like that thought, right? That we might start with a car, and this is very honest, right? Like when you have a car in real life, you might have the car for a couple of months before you like figure out who's going to actually do service on it. Like maybe for some people, it's they find a mechanic the very first time they check on the car, but maybe the dealer does that, and then you decide to find your own personal mechanic later on. So yeah, I think that it's possible that a car would initialize without one, but maybe still has the ability not just to show what mechanic it's been given, but then we need to have the ability to set a mechanic, right? We'd want to start with a car without a mechanic. Maybe you'd have an add mechanic method to the car that just takes in a mechanic and like sets it to that car. Maybe
Put
here.
like an attribute access
Yeah, an adder accessor for a car's mechanic, I think, could work. Because if we said adder accessor here, mechanic, that would mean that we don't literally need to take in a mechanic as an argument when we create a new car. But later on, after we've created the new car, we could say car.mechanic equals and pass in some mechanic object, and then we could call car.mechanic to make sure that that object was set. What's cool about these, right, is like if I wrote a method like def model, and actually I'm going to do this, I'm going to change this up. This will be the adder accessor for mechanic. If I'm changing this to mechanic instead of model, what do I change in the method below? This changes, right, to mechanic. Does that make sense? If I'm rewriting this, and I'm rewriting this because this is an underhood adder accessor. Adder accessor doesn't just have a reader method. What's the writer method for mechanic look like? Yeah, we'd have def mechanic equals, and what's the argument going to be? Adam, you had mentioned, what would you call the argument here in this writer?
It would just be mechanic. We're doing the right thing.
Sure, yeah. And then in here we do what?
And mechanic equals mechanic.
I like it. So I would say that these two methods together, right, will comprise our accessor, right? The accessor literally has written these two methods. So if these two methods are literally sitting on our car class, I don't have to worry about initializing an instance variable mechanic, because at the point that we first call car.mechanic equals, it's going to create the instance variable mechanic at that moment. We don't need to create all of our instance variables and initialize every single time. Sometimes we use an accessor to set the instance variable for the first time, and that's particularly true in cases like this where a car would exist before a mechanic. Maybe if you're inviting somebody to a Scrabble game on like a Words with Friends app, the game exists before the second player has been assigned to it. That's kind of one way we can think about this. The car is like the game, the owner is like player one that's already shown up, but for the full relationship to be modeled, we need to bring in a second person later on called a mechanic. So cool. If we have an adder accessor for mechanic, then I have to start thinking about how am I going to run this code to make sure that this works, right? If we're deciding that a mechanic, yeah, that'll work. That's the ticket. And what about a mechanic? Mechanic. It'll have a name and a specialty. That's right. Name and a specialty. We'll make this a little bigger. Oops, not like that. Not like that. Oh no. I feel like I'm in an Alex Norris comic. All right. Mechanic, name, and specialty. So then if there is a mechanic line over here under car, which we just kind of added in, we could add this. I mean, I'm so proud of us that we figured out all this way to draw cool lines together. I mean, honestly, y'all, that tells the story just fine, right? Like, you can find a tool that does a thing. It's nice to have some sort of way to visualize. There's better tools out there, I'm sure, but this one is fine for me. And this is also really good for actually wireframing websites, so you might bookmark this one for yourself. But this is what I'm kind of thinking of for a car now, right? And as we look at this, this feels like a many-to-many relationship that we've kind of backed our way into. I'm not going to be concerned yet with how an owner would connect to their mechanics or how a mechanic would connect to all the owners that have like potentially paid them. But let's just focus on how a car and a mechanic connect, right? One mechanic can potentially work on many cars as long as the specialty matches, right? And a car can potentially have only one mechanic that's assigned to work on it. So that's what it makes it feel like a one-to-many relationship. I've decided since the car belongs to one mechanic, then the car is the many, and the car's job is to hold the mechanic object. So going back to the README to make sure that we're centered on this, if we wanted to figure out, let's try this one, getting a list of mechanics that have an expertise that match the car classification, right? So I think that's going to require us to start here, actually, to get a list of all mechanics. Because if a car needs to have a list of mechanics, and if we're practicing that single source of truth habit, that means that we'd probably end up deciding that the best job, or the best person to do the job of holding a list of mechanics would be the mechanic class, because that's closest to the definition of mechanic and closest to the moment of initialization when one gets created. So list of all, I'm going to say this is a class method. List of all the cars that are given mechanic services, like a mechanic, that feels like an instance. Get a list of all the car owners that go to a specific mechanic. Specific mechanic feels like instance to me. And once again, like, list of the names of the car owners. So not the full owner object, but just the string that lives on that object. So a slightly different flip on that last method. So right here, we had list of all mechanics, and I'm thinking that we're gonna need this in order for a car to find a way to get to mechanics that have matching classification versus expertise. So a list of all mechanics. That means that we're gonna need to have an add all, right? And that means that we'll need to have a method that returns it. We'll call the method all. We'll make it a class method. That means that all will need to start out with a value that we can then add to. That should set us up with a mechanic.all. It needs to have a name and a specialty. So now I'm going to make some mechanics. Let's make a few. Let's say Ben is a mechanic.new. Ben specializes on, let's see, is it exotic or exotics? I don't remember. Let's go up and look. Antique, exotic, clunker, single word, singular, clunker, exotic, great. Do this. These all need to be like short enough names for a mechanic name tag. I've decided. I feel like Han would be the best at working on a clunker.
I was gonna say that, but I was like, it's no point to right now.
Right? But I'm here with you. We're there, right? Yeah, this is what we call references, right? Cool. So we have Ben, Jen, and Han, and they're able to work on exotic, antique, or clunker, right? We have Scorpio, which is this clunker, and you know what? Bizorpio would be the bizarre Scorpio, so it would be all of a sudden an exotic. This was the car that predated the Ford Taurus, by the way. Exotis. Sweet. So we've made these three mechanics. Let's call mechanic.all. Let's print it on our way in, because it's been a while since we went back to the console. So we should make another visit. We run it. We get to mechanic.all and check it out. We've got Ben, we've got Jan, we've got Han. Fantastic. So we've got three mechanics that have been created. If three mechanics have been created, then that means that a car with a given classification should be able to find the one mechanic that we've created that has the matching expertise. So I think that we could call it by saying something like matching mechanics, perhaps. Like we have this Scorpio. Let's call Scorpio P Scorpio dot, how about we call qualified mechanics? Yeah, that's going to be based on the mechanic specialty, right? We're going to be looking for this value on a mechanic to match this given value on a car. So if Scorpio is looking for qualified mechanics, given that Scorpio is a clunker, I'm expecting that Scorpio is going to find Han, right? So I'm actually expecting this first time that we're going to see like an undefined method error because we haven't actually written that method yet, but that's fine. Qualified mechanics, if I go back to the README, because I've been taking notes the whole time, reminds me that it's an instance method. This is why I take notes the whole time, because I'm thinking pretty fast and under stress when the clock is ticking, and I'd prefer for that thought to live somewhere outside of my brain or else it just bounces. Cool. So I go into car, we want qualified mechanics. Could somebody give me, who has not given me any pseudocode yet, could somebody give me some pseudocode for this method? How could a car find a list of qualified mechanics? Sure. Is the mechanic specialty an instance of a car class? So so if it's a string, then what string on this car instance is going to match up with the mechanic specialty? So we have mechanic.specialty, right? And that should give me a string. Where's that going to match on this car? Classification, very good. So I want to be specific that mechanic specialty might match my own classification. This is one that could trip us up, right? Because like I might remember equals self, But in this case, we're not just matching self because I don't find my object on somebody else. There's just a string that this object shares with some other object. So we need to get into the level to compare those. So iterating through all mechanics, that's going to be mechanic.all. We remember that part. And we're doing a kind of filtering thing again. So that feels like a more select work, right? We don't need all the mechanics. We just need a list of the ones that might fit us. I'm going to say mechanic because it feels like we have a class called mechanic. We have instances of mechanic. That's a very clear word to express my intent of what this object should be. So mechanic has a specialty. Dot specialty. And we want to see if that is the same as my own classification. Let's try it out. Console.rb. Boom, check it out. It's an array, and it's got Han in there. I'm going to run it again so we can make sure that that's what actually printed out last. Scorpio.qualified mechanics. This is cool to me. Like, we've got this, right? So what we could potentially do here is now work on a way that we could add a mechanic to a given car, right? If we know that we have this list of things, we could bridge the gap of like, eventually a car will need to be connected to an owner and a mechanic for some of these later relationship questions, like, hey, what owners has a mechanic done work for, to be answered, right? For a mechanic to figure out the owners associated, that mechanic would need to be present on a car so that it could find that as its car. And then it could map over all the cars that it is associated with and pull off the owner that's associated with that car. And that's how the mechanic could find its way across. That means the car needs to have a mechanic object on it. So to me, it feels like we could have like car.addMechanic, def add mechanic, that takes in a mechanic. And because we have an adder accessor, we could call it here, right? We could call self.mechanic equals, knowing that we're going to set an instance variable under the hood when we do this, self.mechanic equals whatever the argument was. When do we want to do this, though? We don't just want to add any old mechanic, do we? Because, like, here's the thing I don't want to be able to have happen. I don't want to be able to have, like, Bizorpio. I love it. Bizorpio.addMechanic Han. That shouldn't work, right? Because Bizorpio is an exotic, and Han is only authorized to work on clunkers. So we shouldn't be able to match up a clunker worker with this exotic car. Or vice versa. I'm not classist, but it's just a matter of making sure that the mechanic matches up, right? Like the logic of this app, the client has given us this app saying, these are the rules. A car should only be worked on by a mechanic. So if I'm going to say, I took it upon myself to help my work in testing, to write a method about adding a mechanic to a car, and the client says, oh good, that method that you added without me explicitly telling you I was going to pay you for that time, that at least follows the rules that I set, right? And then I go, define follows, and now the client's upset, because I've done work that they didn't explicitly ask for, and not even like in the spirit of what the client was asking for. So here's the thing I'm trying to prevent. I would actually rather have this like return an error or something, like, here's what I want to say, like, should error out because of classification, wow, / specialty mismatch, right? So if I wanted to run this, I think it's going to run. I don't think I'm going to get an error. I think it's going to work, right? And then if we take a look at Bizorpio, there it is, just staring us in the face. I'm an exotic car being worked on by Han. Right? No problem. I'm sure Han's great with clunkers, but this isn't following the rules now. So what could we do? Could we reuse a method that we've already written in here to set a condition for whether we can add this mechanic? Where should the mechanic also show up to be able to be added to this car? The mechanic should also be one of the mechanics that's in qualified mechanics, right? We already figured out the way to figure out which mechanics are associatable with this car. So what we could do here is like say if qualified mechanics dot include. We could call it on self explicitly. I don't think I need to though, because Ruby is going to look at this method and go, there's no local variable called qualified mechanics, and then it's going to make the logical leap of, can I implicitly call a method called qualified mechanics on this instance that I'm in? So I think that's going to work. And then we'll look and see if mechanic is included here, and if so, then we'll set it to self.mechanic. Else, we could say raise, and we could actually be fine here. We could have more fun with this. Raise an argument error, and then we'll say like, sorry. Then we could put in the mechanic's name here, maybe. Mechanic.name is authorized to work on whatever the specialty is. But this is and then whatever our self.classification. Sure. Let's see what happens.
Wait, I haven't used raise yet. What is that?
Raise is just a way to manually cause an error to happen in your code. So I could, if I didn't want to say raise, but I wanted to indicate a bad thing happened, I could literally just say like puts here. The difference between if I said puts and raise argument error is what the code would do afterwards. If I say raise argument error, that's going to stop the code from running. I'm basically literally writing an error into my code. And since Ruby is so dynamically evaluated, right, it's not strongly typed. When we write methods, we don't declare a string must come into this or else. We don't declare an integer must come into this or else. So Ruby gives us like this really fluid way to like write and raise our own errors because they expect us to be able to tell the user when they've given us the wrong type of data manually. So yeah, this is what I think is going to happen is it's going to raise an error, it's going to say argument error, and then it's going to fill in the specific reason for that argument error. Let's try it out. Yes, check out the actual error code. It's stuff we just wrote. I think raising errors is so cool because like we're used to like looking at them and going like, oh no, from on high comes a missive, but now we get to write our own. Yeah, sorry, Han is authorized to work on clunker, but this is a exotic car. So like, of course the grammar here is dog. It's not great. There's like words, this should be an and. I'm not gonna like dress this up a bunch. What we could do here though is we could say, is authorized to work on vehicles with type, and then we could throw like some scare quotes around it. Mechanic.specialty. But this vehicle has type, and then I put scare quotes around this just to like hang a lampshade, so to speak, on the fact that it's not the cleanest. Yeah, we got the double tagger at the end there too.
You just surround the whole thing and then hit quote and then have it surrounded with quotes or highlighted.
Oh, we could. I just wanted it to show like this. I like the backticks here, so it's clear that like I've got our own terms here. But yeah, just to dress up the.
If you use single quotes, would it still work, or would that mess it up?
That's a great question. Yeah, let's see what happens.
Oh, I mean like just within the double quotes.
Oh, within the double quotes there? Single quotes would work. That would work fine too. Yeah. If I did single quotes, by the way, you're going to get the literal stuff. You can only do that interpolation technique in double quote strings in Ruby. If you want to display the actual characters like one by one that were actually typed into a string, you'd use a single quote string. This allows us to actually tell another Rubyist how the syntax works without it getting evaluated as interpolate syntax every single string. Anyways, let's go back on this. And right now, we're coming right up on lunch. Let me get this going, and we'll give it the right mechanic to close off here. So Han shouldn't work. Who should work for Bizorpio? Sure. So let's comment this one out. We'll try Bizorpio, add mechanic, and pass in Ben. We're in. We take a look at Bizorpio. And then we're all set. Mechanic is now set to this mechanic named Ben. Bizorpio still has a nil owner, right? So like we'd still have to add an owner to Bizorpio for it to like work with the whole setup that we're trying to build towards. But at this point, we have done a bunch of this README, right? We figured out, we didn't get through all the car classifications. We did get to this, right? We had an instance method for all the mechanics that have the expertise that matches. That's our qualified mechanics. We also have a list of all mechanics that's working. We don't yet have a list of all the cars that mechanic services. And we don't have these last two. But we've got, I'd say at this point, most of it, right? Average amount of cars owned for all owners, that's a good one that we'll probably want to tackle this afternoon too. Is this going to be an instance method or a class method? Average amount of all cars owned for all owners, yeah. Once we see all owners, right, the focus is beyond the scope of one owner instance. So yeah, later on this afternoon when we reconvene, I'll probably pick up here, and then we'll talk more about the stuff. We'll recap the stuff that we did this morning for a few minutes, and then move into talking about more of the many-to-many relationships, and not just using select for the one-to-many, but using that pattern of like using select to get to the middle, and then using map to get to the other side of what's being stored on the middle.
Are you posting this online?
Absolutely. Yeah. Cheers, y'all. Enjoy your lunch. I like that.
This was great today.
Awesome. We cool.
I don't want to interrupt you.
Yeah, for sure.
One thing I realized today, I've been getting caught up on a lot, was when to use dot and when to use parentheses. When I'm like dot select, dot name, dot stuff like this. So that
sure,
I
sure.
realize that's what's been causing me problems this whole last week. Is like in my syntax is like I don't know when to do which, but I think now I've connected the dots. Or like I'm calling stuff an adder accessor and adder readers. Those are methods because those are referring methods. So that'd be dot operator.
So that's right. Yeah, adder accessor, you're defining methods, so you'd say dot when you wanted to get to those.
But I would only ever use parentheses if it's called, if something like that method had an argument.
That's exactly right. There you go. Yeah, if the instructions of the argument require stuff in the parentheses, then that's how many arguments you need to pass in when you call it. Very good. Yeah.
I still get a little caught up when it's like a line. It's like
Sure.
parentheses dot, like shit. But
Yeah.
I can follow it.
It's tough. You get better at it the more that you do it, for sure. Solid. Yeah, totally. Has Cardi B ever done like a Mardi Gras track? Because that feels like it would be extremely unreal.
Cardi Bra.
Right, Cardi Bra. It's like a tongue twister. A Cardi Bra for Mardi Gras.